This short video provides you with some explanation about how to multiply and divide by tens, 100s and 1000s. There's two things to think about when we're multiplying by 10, 100 or 1000. If we begin with whole numbers here, it's pretty straightforward. If we begin with decimals, it's still pretty straightforward. We just need to think a bit more carefully. So when I multiply by 10, when I've got whole numbers, very simply we add an extra zero. So that the result is we add a zero here, we add a zero here, and here, and here. We end up with 20,000, 1,500, 1,500, 250, and 40. However, when we worry about the decimal places here, then what happens is we need to move the decimal place. Because we're multiplying by 10, the decimal place gets shifted like this to there. It gets moved to the right. Now what we end up with is a strange looking thing here, but that's a 0 and a 7 and a point and nothing else after it. So that just means we're left with 7. And what we get here is 5.2. The decimal point has moved to the right. So multiplication by 10 moves the decimal place to the right. Multiplication by 100 then does a very similar thing, except because I have two zeros here, I'll add two zeros to these things. And when I get down here, instead of moving the decimal place once, I'll move the decimal place twice. Let's go. The answer to this question is, there's my 2,000 that I started with, and I add two more zeros. So I'm left with 200,000. 150 plus two more zeros gives me 15,000. 25 with two more zeros. 4 with two more zeros. Okay, and then we get to the decimal point. Now, this is what happens here. The decimal point moves. What's the decimal point? Once for 10, twice for 100. What that's done is it's left a gap after the 7, and we can fill that in now with a 0. Because we have to have a number or a digit in every single gap. So when I times 0.7 by 100, I end up with the answer 70, and in this last case I end up with the answer 52, because the decimal place gets moved. Here's a slow motion replay with everything. There's the first decimal place, and that's what we end up with the second decimal place. And so when we get to 1,000, how many zeros are we working with? 3, 1, 2, 3. So we add 3 zeros. And you can always think about, there's the original number and there's the new zeros. There's the original number and there's 3 more zeros. Okay, and that's easy for whole numbers. I've added an extra decimal, as you can see at the bottom. So what we're going to do is, we've got thousands, we've got 3 zeros, so we're going to move the decimals, and here we go. Move it 1 position, move it 2 positions, move it 3 positions. And we're going to fill in the missing gaps again. Here at the 7, I've left 2 gaps, so I fill it up. And at 52 now fills with a gap here, so our answers are 700, 520, and what was originally 0.8491 is now 849.1, because I moved down here the decimal from behind the 0, 1, 2, 3 positions, and there's my answer. So multiplication by 1,000 either adds zeros or moves the decimal place to the right. And you can then keep going. If you wanted to multiply by 1,000,000, you would add 6 zeros, or you would move the decimal place 6 points, like here, 6 positions, and then just fill however many zeros were remaining, based on the number of gaps left. When we begin dividing by tens, hundreds and thousands, we need to think about the decimal place moving to the left as opposed to the right. So division makes our answers smaller. And what we have here are the 5 numbers, including 0.7 at the bottom. And if multiplication moves the decimal point to the right, then like that, then division, which is the opposite operation, is going to move the decimal points to the left. And I'm going to bring over my friendly decimal points here, and we're going to put them here. Now what I'm doing is pretending that all of these things have decimal points. 4 we don't have to write a decimal point after the number 4, but if I start dividing by 10, I can think about putting them there, because what happens is I move my decimal points to the left when I divide by 10. I only move my decimal point by 1 point because there is only 1 0 in my division. So here we go, we get the decimal points and we move them to the left, and we move that out of the way. So what we end up with are answers of 215. I don't need to write the 0.0, because I don't need to write zeros at the end of decimals unless I'm specifically told to. We're not worried about that at the moment. 2.5. Now 0.4, you should never just write 0.4. It's a bit confusing when you're reading someone's maths book. So 0 always starts a number, and 0. Again we start with 0, 0.07. So all of those decimal places moved 1 to the left. So our next stop is dividing by 100. There are 2 zeros, so we need to move decimal places 2 positions to the left. Again, if you haven't written a decimal place here, let's get one and put it in just to make the working a little bit clearer. So here we go. That's where we might start with decimal places. Dividing by 100 moves these decimal places. No, it doesn't move that. It moves this. There's 1 position. There is 2 positions. Now, let's take the same approach as we did with multiplication. If there are gaps, we fill them in. So, I have a 0 that goes there. I do need to get rid of that old decimal place, get that out of the way, and going back to this point, now I've still got a gap here as well, so I'm going to fill it in. 0 there. What are our answers? 20. Now notice where we started with 2,000 we have 20. Things are reducing because we're dividing. 1.5. 0.25. We begin with a 0. 0.04. And 0.007. But we would read that as 0.007 if we're reading it correctly as a mathematician. Okay, let's have a look at dividing by 1,000. Now what you should be able to guess is that if we divide by 1,000, 1, 2, 3 zeros, we're going to move all these decimal places 1, 2, 3 positions, and the problem is if we move this decimal here 1, 2, 3 positions, we'll leave some gaps. So let's go and get our decimal places. We're going to get rid of the white ones. We're going to bring in these yellow ones and pretend that there are decimal places everywhere. We are dividing by 3 zeros, sorry, we're dividing by 1,000. So we move, and 1, 2 positions, 3 positions. Okay, now let's go and fill the gaps. There's a 0 next to the 25. There are 2 zeros in front of the 4. There are 2 zeros in front of the 7. Or 3 zeros in front of the 7 now. So, how are our answers looking? 2000 divided by 1000 is 2. 0.15. 0.025. Okay? Again, we're always beginning with zeros, even though there's no zeros here. And we filled in the gap. That 0 comes from there. There's 2 zeros here, so let's write them in. 0.004, 0.123, that's our positions. And finally, where we started with 490, we've divided by 1000, moving the decimal place to the left. So we have 0. And we'll write them all in, 490623. What do you have to remember? Division moves decimals to the left, multiplication moves decimals to the right. And that is the end. Come and find one of your teachers if you have any questions about multiplying or dividing by tens, 100s or 1000s.